What do you call someone that always seems to be in the right place at the right time? Is this just serendipity, or is that person putting themselves in a position to take advantage of an opportunity? Since the old Roman Empire days, philosophers have been proclaiming that luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And I don't want to sound like I'm stealing the final luck or hard work question Guy Raz famously asked guests on his How I Built This podcast, but it's an interesting thought framework for your consideration while listening to this conversation I recently had with my good friend John Herman. And while retracing that dozen-year working relationship would have been more than enough to pack this episode full of insightful conversation, we went way back in time to his apparel industry merchant days. And that's because while it seems mismatched in hindsight to his CPG industry experience now, it ended up playing an outsized role even to this day within his newest venture, Bureau Brewing. But John and I did talk extensively about the constantly evolving and maturing sports nutrition niche of the supplement industry, as he saw it firsthand through his time running the category at the specialty retailer GNC and climbing the executive ranks at Nutribulk before and after the launch of the C4 Energy carbonated energy drink that now generates over $650 million in annual retail sales. Finally, we talked about his decision to leave that powerhouse company and what led him to believe pairing the celebrity packaged goods movement with the nascent non alcoholic beer market was that next right place at the right time moment. But these are just some of the interesting topics we chatted about in this episode. So without further delay, here is the recent conversation I had with my good friend, John Herman. John, I guess I'll start off by saying thanks for taking some time out of your day. I know this is kind of the end of your Friday, so I appreciate that time.
Yeah, great to spend time with you, Josh. It's been a while, so looking forward to it.
I was going to start by kind of picking up your professional experience, like where our story started, because that sounded romantic. But you said something through the email that I thought actually made a lot of sense, which was kind of like to complete the professional arc, or just kind of where you've been in your career. It did start before GNC, and I loved kind of what you said about. You mentioned like trend on the body and then trend in the body. And then it's kind of like, this consumer evolution of legacy categories. So like, hopefully we could kind of jump through all of those things. So I'm actually going to start
Okay.
in an area that is before GNC, before we met. And I think it's interesting because one, American Eagle was a brand. This gets lumped into like the Abercrombie, Hollister kind of period of time. You were the early, right when I was, this don't make you feel old because we're not much different of age, but like I graduated high school in 2003. And I think that's when you were and that was still like American Eagle was hot. That was like, that
Peak.
was, like people loved it. Like that was what everybody was wearing. They were going to the mall. They were buying American Eagle. They were buying Abercrombie. They were buying Hollister. They were buying these things in like droves. That was it. That was the hottest thing possible. So I'm kind of interested, like, what did that feel like inside as like the buyer, the merchant, the person that was putting that stuff out there and making honestly the trends of what the style and people were wearing at that time.
I didn't know what I was getting into. I think I was 6 months into that job before I realized like what it meant to be a merchant. That was like you said, peak. That was when the American Eagle logo came out because Abercrombie came out with the moose, and there was this brand Hollister popping up, and it was like, I mean, the summer song in 2001 was it had Abercrombie and Fitch in the hook.
Yeah.
So like I found myself by happenstance, because I was working retail in college, that I was in this like very desirable position that people actually went to Fashion Institute of Technology schools and took fashion merchandising degrees. And I was just a marketing and communications guy. And I loved it because I'm not diagnosed, and I'm too old for that to have been diagnosed when I was young, but like I feel like I'm a little ADD. Like if I lived in an Excel spreadsheet all day, every day, I would lose my mind. But if my head was in the clouds of creativity every day, I would lose my mind. But like being able to jump around, that's fun to me. And that's what being a merchant was. So part of it was, how do you just like go out and I'm 21, 22, going to like spring break in Panama City Beach, Florida, which, it's not the hottest destination, but pretty cool on a company card,
Yeah.
or Lake Tahoe for an X game. And you're just walking around taking pictures of the cool kids and trying to bring back trends to say like, hey, I think this blue is trending. And I just thought it was, it taught me about intuition and being able to kind of see a pattern versus one-offs. And as a merchant, you're wrong a lot, but like you balance your intuition with your historical data, and you want to make sure that you have your blue polo or red polo like you have on, but maybe the color of the season is bright pink, and you have that too for fashion. But how you can put the pieces together, they always said, was you're the hub of the wheel. You have finance connecting with planning, connecting with design and production, and like you were the jack of all trades, master of none, and you had to pull it together. And I thought it was amazing, and it made me understand like the interconnectivity of these different offices in a company setting.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, because I think about it as like, could I work in that category as like somebody that is definitely not a fashionista, or somebody that wherever. And we kind of talked off camera, and you know me for a while, that like I typically look at things as more from consumer behavior or demand drivers
Yeah,
over just like categorically. Sometimes you have to match those things up, and what does one mean to the other? Are they going to, cause a riff or create a multiplier effect or whatever that is? But like that is a category that like I've never really been defined by like the clothes that are on my body, or like some people watches or cars, or that's never
yeah.
been like what ultimately is like the defining attributes of what I hold true, or like what I focus a lot of my attention on. But I do find it super interesting that like you're even going to some of the spring breaks, but like where do you spot the trends, or where do you spot like I think we probably take it for granted now with social media, where you can kind of like see everything,
That's
and you
right.
see what the cool kids are doing in all these like coastal cities and in the middle of the country or whatever it is. And you kind of take and you spin or iterate off of that. But like before, you had to actually travel to like where the hottest people were, the quote unquote cool people. Like what were they doing? How are they doing
And
those things? And then how do
and
you
and you
steal from them?
and you were taking photos with a camera with film that you had to develop. But like, not to jump ahead, but like, if you go out and you find out like, okay, again, early 2000s, the shift from cargo shorts to flat front shorts, it was massive. You saw it in the trend. But that same thing was applicable to, you fast forward to pre-workout trends and raw material ingredients, and the trend of creatine or flavor trends. It's like, how do you spot those things? Because ultimately, like, you have brands that can start to be the first. They're the trendsetters, right? Like, they're the ones that say consumers want collaborations on flavor, or consumers really want this ingredient because it's the right level of performance. um, but trying to eye that up and understand like where everything is heading, so that regardless of your category, we're all competing in commodities. So how does your commodity feel more on trend and special than anyone else's?
After you were at American Eagle, you went over to Land's End, and
Yeah,
it's a brand that, again, I don't know too much outside of a few things. And the thing that I always hold true about the brand is that it was, from Sears. And why I love the story of Sears is, one, people follow the downfall or whatever. But if you go
yeah,
back and you look at like the 100-year arc of their business, and you look at all the different things that they created, it's kind of astounding. Like it's one of those businesses that like you go back and you're like, wow, they created this, and they did, like, they were part of the first credit card. They were part of, arguably the direct to consumer mail. Well, there's all these things that they did, and there's like numerous things, but they were also really great at like private label and creating
yeah.
these like massive brands that now have spun off in a ton of different categories. And it's just interesting to me that like this ultimate business that just didn't end up being successful had so much of an impact in so many different ways that maybe we don't even consider anymore.
Well, I mean, again, I'm dating myself. Geez, I'm gonna leave this and have to just cry and dye my gray hair. But I mean, the Sears Dream Book at Christmas time for any kid in
Yeah.
the '80s, it was like you pulled that thing out. But like the catalog, the innovation they had, Lamb's End. I mean, they innovated on the concept of, they were one of the first websites to buy clothing online.
Hmm.
Now, what happened was, ownership changed. An individual bought it for Sears and saw it more as a real estate deal than they necessarily saw it as the innovative platform it was. So when I joined Land's End, it was like, how do we bring back that Americana and that goodness? And like, the true heritage of Land's End was about customer service. And when you would walk into that headquarters, there was maybe like a 1960s vehicle. It was parked out front, and it was in the Lamb's End catalog. And Lamb's End said guaranteed period. Didn't matter if you had a complaint about the product, you could return it. Somebody bought the car, and I think it was like 15 years later, said, I don't want the car anymore. And they went back to Lamb's End, said, hey, the car isn't running right. And Lamb's End said, fine, give us the car back. But like you think about it, like the brand love that creates and like the quality, like backing. I think that always really stuck. I will never forget about that car because you walk past it every day, but it's always about like, if every interaction with a customer can make it count. And like, look, today that's a comment on social media and a DM, but like if every interaction is an opportunity to make a lifelong customer, like how do you maximize that?
Yeah, no, and I love, especially thinking back in my, I guess, previous experience, but just like it's interesting how sometimes little bits and pieces impact, different elements even 10, 20 years later. And you're like, oh, these are core pillars of why I believe what I believe or how I interact or how I,
Yeah.
kind of, and sometimes it probably takes, some time to like appreciate those things. I think in reverse and in the moment, maybe you're not really recognizing those and you're kind of saying, it's great or whatever. But then eventually you look back, you go, wow, those were the special moments. Those were the things that like, yes, I want to hold those into my new businesses. I want to hold those into my, each time I'm in a new company, like these things are what are tried and true. And I love that because I think that's an important aspect of all this is like, you have to be building on, and kind of, I always call it like the remix of previous
Yeah.
things is like, you're taking what's old because humans are, they're unpredictable but predictable in when you look at them not as one but as groups. And when you do that, then you're able to put some of that stuff into play with the new tools and the new wherever it's like you said, it's DMs, it's not
Yeah.
handshakes and guarantees anymore. It's kind of something different, but it's all the same at the end of the day.
You have these formative years or formative experiences or formative moments that like brands will build upon. And like it truly is like you don't realize that you're living something that'll shape you later on, or you don't realize that this idea you're coming out with technologically for a customer experience is new. But then all of a sudden you see all the pieces fall, and it really ends up being pretty crazy. Um, Tangentially, I mean, like I even think of I had a boss, not going to say any bosses' names, but like he would redline emails after you would send them. And one thing that he would do is he would redline and it would be like anywhere you had an I, he'd change it to a we. Anywhere you had a me, it would be an us. And at the time I thought like, this is insane. How do you have time to redline my emails? But like, damn it, if I don't redline people now because that's too much. But all of my emails, I will generally never put an I and I will generally never put a me. And like just the message that outwardly can promote of the team environment and how you can actually be a leader, like little tangential from like the business journey, but like you do not realize it while it's going on, but like you're constantly being trained for like the next thing that can come up.
And then kind of moving into the GNC timeframe, like it's interesting because like, so American Eagle, like we talked about the heyday, kind of that thing, Land's End completely different because you're kind of trying to necessarily go back to the
Reinvigorate.
heritage and and then GNC, we could say there was other heydays or earlier phases that maybe whatever, but like in my mind, and maybe that's again the bias in the time frame that I was within the space, was that the time you were there during, was it 2012 to 2016 timeframe?
Yeah.
Like if we're in, again, you were focused on the sports nutrition, kind of category that was very well defined back then, but not so much anymore. And during that time, that was where you went to get those products. You still went to specialty. That was where you went. You
Yep.
had to shop for the assortment and just the breadth and the depth of merchandising in those stores. There was really not many other options. I mean, there were, but there weren't. I mean, vitamin.com and but it was still such an important point
Yeah.
to have your brand. And again, this is where we met. Like I was at Muscle Farm, was like the time we had that circled of like, if you're in GNC, you've made it. Like that's the thing. And I think during that time frame, that was a lot of people's target, was like, if we're on the shelf at GNC, we've made it. We've wherever
And
store count was growing, everything was like, even just specialty as a whole. I think about that time frame of retail of like, I made the joke recently when I was talking to one of my clients about how crazy it sounded back then when we would go to like individual stores and buy one thing. We'd go to the next one, we'd go to the next one. Like your whole
yeah.
Sunday would be like going and shopping. Where then now, Amazon or even like, something like a Walmart or a Target is like, you go in there and you buy 17 different categories all at once. It's such an easy trip, a convenience and wherever. But like that wasn't necessarily the behavior back then. It wasn't that people did that.
And you couldn't go at that point in time online and learn everything about a product. Yeah, bodybuilding.com was so innovative, and with their forums, like it was an educational piece, but like sports nutrition and these weird looking ingredients that can be really intimidating when you just want to get in better shape, you need an expert to walk you through it. And like you couldn't just go on YouTube at that point and watch videos and get trained on what was the right ingredient and dosing, and you didn't have all of the resources that exist today. And I think that really led to a tremendous point of differentiation for GMC at that point in time, and they were dominating the market, and it was a sign of how you could build a brand if you were truly there. And yeah, it was interesting. I didn't have a background in sports nutrition. I was really just looking geographically to get back from Wisconsin to Pittsburgh, and I found myself managing 200 plus vendors of the, probably like a 750 to 100, $750 million sports nutrition category. And I was drinking from a fire hose. Talk to me about protein sources. What's the difference between a hydrolysate and an isolate? And, you know, what's this thing, DMAA? The first week I was on the job at GNC, the CEO came down and said, "John, get all the DMAA pulled off the shelf." Like,
You're like,
okay,
what is
what is
this?
that? And
Think about just also I'm thinking, this is probably, again, because, you and I know this and maybe some of the audience members know, but like there's a circus of characters too within the sports nutrition space. I'd argue probably every category, but in general, there's probably a higher density of
without a doubt.
characters in sports nutrition. So then you're coming in there and these like personalities are probably just like, and there are a lot of, like, at the time, a lot of testosterone, a lot of just, men that were kind of probably telling you what you needed to hear. You were kind of, again, at that point, you didn't really have the confidence, I guess, to probably
Oh,
know
yeah.
what you wanted to like project on the category and how you wanted it to be curated. You're kind of just like, what are these guys saying? They're all like passionate, excited, or whatever. And you're like, this is fun, I guess. Like,
There's one of the brands, which I'm not going to say the name, that somehow, like, I would consider him a friend today. But my first phone call with him, I needed a simple contract signed. It was for a promotion that he agreed to do. And within 5 minutes, he told me to go F myself and hung up the phone. I'm like, all right, I guess this is what I'm dealing with now. But it did kind of teach me, like, yeah, I wasn't changing who I was or being fake, but like you kind of had to wear a different hat for each of the personalities, because you'd sit across the way from, maybe it was a celebrity, maybe it was a bodybuilder, maybe it was just an entrepreneur that like he had been through some stuff, and like you had to kind of know how to relate to them. And I thought that was so much fun. Like, honestly, like, and nostalgia takes away any of like the moments where you're like, wow, this really sucks. But like in actuality, like the personalities in the industry, and what I enjoyed most, even after the fact, years later, going back to like a GMC convention, you'd see these familiar faces, and generally it's a small community of people that like they kind of root for each other. You're competing, but you're rooting for each other. And I always thought that was really interesting, and I really enjoyed that.
there's a lot of things that keep me close to the core. Like that's where I started. And though my client base is definitely diversified in so many different ways, like there's still always this thing I go back to in that, sports nutrition kind of world. And it's mostly the people that I don't know, for whatever reason, it's the community. It's like, it's a circus and there's all these things, but like, I don't know. I feel like it's my circus. I like it. I
Yeah.
don't know. Like whatever, anybody's picking their own kind of craziness. That's the flavor of craziness that I tend to like sometimes. And now I look at it in a much different way, probably, similar to you, of like, there are all those characters create some, I don't know, like creative combustion, or like they take chances, they take risks, they do things maybe
Absolutely.
sometimes that you look at and you go, maybe I wouldn't do it that way, but you appreciate their ability to move trends forward, I think. And
Yeah.
now, a lot of the food, beverage, and a lot of these other spaces will look at that and go, wow, this is such a great, I'm thinking about it from when you went to spring breaks and you kind of did this stuff. Like you went to the cool people. It was kind of in the same way. Like that's not to say they're cool, but like they are thinking forward. They're trying to, put their stake in the sand. And then as these things have moved into formats, expansion, and market, like then those big CPG brands will have the ability to take some of that stuff and run with it and maybe do it
Yeah.
better or whatever it is. But like, it's now much more appreciated, but I do, still times think about it from like when I was in my mid 20s starting in there. And I'm like, it was wild.
And it evolved over time, and I think you saw a lot of regulatory come in, and quite frankly, it was a good thing to happen. Like I think it allowed the industry to mature and move forward, which I think it did change some of the personalities in the room, and it probably corporatized. And you look at what happens with, you know, large, great organizations like a Glambia becoming a bigger player or investment from larger CPG. Like the whole industry kind of grew up, but 2012 to 2016, it was kind of in its awkward teenage years. It was like, yeah, the voice would crack sometimes, but like you just had a lot of people trying to move it forward. And like, just to react to the coolness comment, because I'll never forget my first Olympia. I'm this like coming from these preppy American brands, showing up at the Olympia in the bar of I think it's maybe a Hilton where everybody ends up at the night. And I remember looking around thinking like, what the hell is this place and who are these people? And then I quickly realized like, wait, I'm the only one that doesn't look the same here. Like I'm the weirdo here. But like, and then you just gain an appreciation for like the passion, the work, and like the work that they do professionally, but then also like, the amount of work that they put into their bodies and their physiques
Yeah.
and their fitness. Like it was it was super eye opening for sure.
Yeah, I always felt like an outsider at those things. Like you have to kind of look around and go like, I don't look like the rest of these guys. Not to say that's a bad
Yeah.
thing, because then you have your own, portion or part of that whole
Yeah.
area. But it's one of those things where you look at it and you go, huh, like I do feel like sometimes I'm a little bit of an outsider, which is okay. Now I'm okay with it. But back then it was like,
Yeah.
stick out a little bit. And then I guess I never, I know we talked early on when you made the transition, but I don't think I ever asked this question. So I'm actually just personally curious. Like, what was that transition? Like, what got you to move from GNC over to, Nutrabolt? And, like, I know that I'm sure you worked with them and you worked with DOS and you had an appreciation for them, but like, was there anything that like you saw and you were like, oh, I want to take this jump here? Because it was again, 2016, I don't think GNC was hitting the peak, but I don't think you could see forward that like, in the next couple of years, it was going to go down to like, you weren't jumping ship early. So like there had to be something a little bit more exciting maybe with Nutrabolt, or like that they had a bigger vision of ideas of like what they wanted to that matched more your.
It you hit the nail on the head. So like going back to the personalities that you would deal with at GMC, many of the people I would still consider friends, but they weren't like me. Now Nutribullet, on the other hand, like they were my fastest growing brand. I had a great relationship with the team there, and Doss and I specifically, we just we built a relationship in that time. Like he was building his business at the same time that I was in that category. And one day over lunch, he asked me if I would ever want to make the jump and be on that side. And I thought about it, but like that was a team that I felt like I could be part of and make an impact. And then we talked about exactly what you're saying, like what is the wider opportunity? Is it this hardcore sports nutrition element, or is there a mainstreamification that you can tell this story of? Like to like at that point in time, you were seeing more and more of this like health and wellness trend wasn't niche. It was going to become bigger. And then you saw the writing on the wall that like you would start to get functional ingredients elsewhere. But I think it was the people, it was the opportunity. I believed in the brand, and I wanted to see what the impact was. And what made that really interesting is merchandising 101 back to being in apparel. It's like you would think about good, better, best strategies and how you build pricing at opening price points so that people can enter your brand and still feel pride in wearing that American Eagle, but then build something that was a higher price point that was maybe higher fashion and higher quality. And like thought about like how could that impact our product architecture and what we were doing that could allow the brand to expand and introduce new consumers to the category within mainstream channels, whether that be an Amazon or a Target or a Walmart, while at the same time making sure that your core was highly innovative and still really effective for the customers that were shopping in specialty, or the customers that maybe were a little bit more advanced in their fitness journey. I think all of that just seemed like a wonderful opportunity. But what the 8 years at Nutribullet was compared to what I thought I was getting into, like I could have never dreamed of everything I learned and what we accomplished in that time. Like I had no idea what I was going to have be in front of me. And I think a lot of that came from the fact that I was coming from these bigger corporate companies. Like the corporate company is you show up at work, you work your 9 to 5, you then, one day you get a director, and then you get this. And, this idea of truly being entrepreneurial and pushing it. Um, DOS introduced me to that world, and NutriBullet did.
Yeah, I think that I'm always super appreciative of, and I always kind of like throw love to Nutrabolt around a lot of like just taking a more professional approach and kind of, I always say putting into like the big CPG playbook, but it's really just big business or big, like you said, price
Yeah,
pack architecture, a lot of these like structural things that, if you are a startup business, you probably don't think through a lot. And a lot of the sports nutrition space in aggregate, it's big, but it's fragmented. There's a lot of like that long tail, a lot of
yeah,
that kind of like smaller brands. And you get kind of drowned it out with the idea that like they are looking at things from a much different perspective of survival over this idea of how do I take, some of these tried and true methods from larger industries or even just, big CPG and saying, how do we put these in play into our business to go across large retail and segment customers? And like, again, maybe it was also timing because during that time we did see such an expansion of consumers and just channels, and just everything seemed to be opening up at that time, that it made sense to have some of that structure in there. And if you could
yeah.
take advantage and put the right playbook down, then you were ultimately going to succeed probably much quicker than other ones that we're trying to like fumble through and try to implement things through a more startup mentality and whatever. Because when you start to get into grocery, you start to get into mass or convenience or whatever, those are legacy sales and distribution models that like they've been there before we were born, and they'll be there before after we're dead, and they're not going to change very much. And like
That's right.
you got to play the game, and you got to know how to play the game to be profitable and grow and be able to do that. And it's not so much that when you were thinking about e-com or you're looking at specialty or whatever, there's a lot more flexibility, and you can be loosey goosey with a lot of things and be able to like still be successful, where I don't think that could be the case. So then when those things started to play out in our space, it needed to have the right people there to be able to take advantage of it, which I think Nutrabolt was one of the few that was able to think through it in the right way. Because again, when you start to think about platforms of the product and like energy being this thing that you could build around, and then arguably I always make the point of like that decision to move into carbonated energy drinks in, I think it was mid 2018, if I remember correctly, somewhere around there.
Yeah,
But like,
we launched in March of 2018.
yeah,
Um,
so like that time, like that decision, and then that being, you guys weren't first. I mean, I think Bang was already blazing a trail, and like you guys were kind of following there, and like that decision changed, I think, everything. I think when you made the point around like you could have never imagined where that is, like I would argue that that one decision and how that became successful did transform the organization into something that it probably always wanted to be, but maybe just didn't know how to get to.
yeah,
And now it is. Now it's that, arguably one of the stalwarts of the space of, there's those few that you put on that Mount Rushmore, and that's probably one of those companies.
it's, by being able to evolve with the times, whether that be the channel structure, the consumers that you're trying to attract to your brand, or the format as you get into carbonated beverage, like that evolution allows for longevity. And if you get too hung up on like, it's not saying forget who you are, because like I think fundamental to a brand is having a soul and a core, but you need to be able to evolve with the times to have longevity. And launching into beverage, we knew nothing about beverage. And Bang did all of the hard work, right? Like they made distributors get over Monster being upset that they had left. They made retailers realize, there's opportunities for brands not called Red Bull and Monster and Rockstar. And they ultimately, provided a unique product format that was really innovative for the place. It had flavors that you didn't have to acquire a taste for. It was zero sugar. It had functional ingredients. Put aside anything else that could be negative throughout their, time period, but they made people think differently. And what that ultimately opened up the door for, you know, the overnight success that was Celsius, 20 years in the making, or C4, it was because they knocked down the door and made people think differently, that all of a sudden retailers were expanding their set and distributors were open to taking on new. And I think, I credit Doss, entirely for that, because he saw that trend happening probably before Bang launched. And then we had a still beverage at that point in time that was great in the gyms, right? Gold's Gym and whatnot. And people in the office would take a soda stream and they'd
Hmm.
carbonate the C4 still. And we launched the beverage. We figured out how to make it. The margins were absolutely awful on day one. And Getting inventory was horrible. We had a sleeved can. It was so inefficient. But we had a model and we figured out a way. We brought on like great advisors from, Coca-Cola that could help us with, understanding route to market and this thing called DSC. And, the same way that we figured out how to build digital, we hired great people and we were smart. And I think across the board, we were never fired. Like we were never ego led to say that we had every answer. Like, but we had ideas. So then we just had to figure out a way to get there. And yeah, I think that shift to carbonated, it was an absolute game changer.
Yeah, it's interesting the yin and yang of when we talk about Bang. Obviously, you and I can take and move the personality to the side and appreciate just how many things his brand did to open up the doors in a number of different ways. I always say, like, without them, there probably wasn't, the C4 energies. There wasn't,
Yeah.
from the carbonated, there wasn't the ghost. Like maybe there was, but it's the cap is $100 million or something like that. It's not like you're searching for billions or, these opportunities became available because he was able to carve out this new idea, this new thing. And I do think, there's most people that can't detach the personality, which we all get. And then there's, Dawson and Nutrabolt, which I think is like, we love to just kind of put our head down and operate. And I don't want any of the spotlight. And that, I think in the early phase, probably, I would say, helped, but also hurt, because I think in that space, there's a lot of loud personalities. There's a lot of really like just big lifestyle kind of like aspirational things that those brands are trying to achieve. And then you have C4 that's like, it took some time, I think, to like find that one like voice and like be able to be confident, to be able to like bring that to the forefront and then just have everything move forward. While you guys were still, I mean, I would say it was respectable in terms of like the growth was always there, but I do think like it took a little bit of time to like find the voice to like, what are we in this big thing? Like, where do we carve out our people at? Why, like, we don't have to be Bang or Monster or Red Bull or Celsius or any of these people. Like, we could be ourselves. And then, I think somebody like a KDP or whatever looks at that and goes, oh, now we know who they are. We know what they're about. We can define this and take it and even build off of that, because we're great at, sales and marketing and kind of building doing those things. Like, that's what we're great at. So then we could take this and then move it forward. We can't build it, but we could take it and scale it, which was great.
And when you see, I think it's exactly that. But when you start to just understand, like, C4 was about performance, it was grounded in the gym, regardless of people's opinions today. And, the legacy of C4 is gym sports performance. And when you're able to acknowledge that, you incorporate functional ingredients, but then on top of that, NSF certification, that you can now go out and sign professional athletes to be, the face of the brand. I think it was a big point of clarity for consumers. Maybe so, maybe no. Internally, it gave us a North Star, but like externally, from a strategic standpoint, you're spot on. Like, that brand is about performance. That's what their role is. And we understand how that fits in our portfolio. And then on top of that, you hit on like the idea, like, you're now moving into these retailers that you're playing with the big boys that are stalwarts and unchanging. A level of sophistication, maturity, and professionalism that you can bring, I think, allows for them to have confidence that like something isn't going to happen unexpectedly 6 months from now that will put our business at risk. And I think if you're looking at, a great partner like KDP, like I think our professionalism shown through our ability to operate, our ability to execute, and really commercialize and bring an idea to fruition, I think that was a key differentiator for us.
Now, I know we could keep talking about this stuff forever, but I want to transition into like current time and just the transition from, because we talked at Beverage Forum just about the new project overall. You were kind of giving me some details, but not all the details, because I think you guys were still working through some of that different stuff at the time. But I want to hear kind of how that transition went from, okay, I'm at Nutrabolt and, the president and running this. And then all of a sudden there's this spark somewhere else and there's this idea. And then they're like, because I think even if people are not at the highest level of senior leadership and whatever that is, I would argue that there's a lot of people within organizations that are saying, I have something, or I have something that I want to accomplish, or I want whatever these things are. And maybe they're stuck, maybe they're not, maybe they don't know how to get through that. And maybe there's some story that could be told that maybe makes sense that you had to work through with your own brain to like, how do you, go off and now you're in this new startup, risky, different category, wherever. And it's like, you're back to this arguably the start, but it's again, not necessarily the start.
Yeah, I was I was in a great situation. I was, the president of the company. I was overseeing sales, marketing, product development, the commercial strategy. I worked with amazing people. Like I truly love that team and the relationships there. I mean, forever friends. And you see so much of hustle culture out there, and like it was an 8-year grind. I've said this a lot, probably in excess, but like every fast growing brand likes to show up the hockey stick growth chart. Look how good we are, look how smart we are. But when you zoom into that chart, it's jagged. And business is not for the faint of heart. And you can be here today, gone tomorrow, and like you live it and you grind for 8 years, you put your heart and soul into it. And quite frankly, I got tired. And yeah, I think you combine that with the fact of just like, what were you most enjoying? And I think I was reflecting and saying that build of beverage was probably one of the most enjoyable experiences in my life. Super stressful, but really enjoyable. And the next phase I think was a little bit more about maturity and process and continuing to really push it forward. But like it just wasn't for me. And I think, funny enough, I'm sitting in my newer house right now, but a week after my wife and I put an offer in on it, um, I told her I wanted to quit my job. And you can imagine she loves that. But I did. And I took the summer off and I needed a reset. I took my daughter to soccer camp. I was working on like work around the house. And, I was trying to think of what I wanted to do next. And in my head, it was like, CEO, 100 to 150 million in revenue. Let's find a brand that's really great. The founder got it to a spot, but now we need someone that can, professionalize it and take it to the next level. And I had a couple opportunities and it just didn't excite me. And then just by happenstance, I met an amazing team over at a VC fund that was really thinking about non-alcoholic beer as a category. And they thought, this is the next big thing. And as I was looking at it, I thought non-alcoholic beer looked a lot like energy did. You mentioned Bang starting the trend back in 2018 when C4 launched. What they call performance energy now was like 5% of a $13 billion addressable market. Today, performance energy is pushing, I think, 30% of like a 20 plus $billion market.
Yeah.
And it was completely redefined. And like, you look at, I mean, my fridge always has Poppy in there.
Mm.
I like Olipop too, but it always has Poppy. And like, you look at what's happening with carbonated soft drinks, I just started thinking, I'm like, well, non-alcoholic beer is kind of that. You have a legacy beer business that it's people fighting over the same slice of pie. And like, yes, I make a marketing mistake, so the other brand wins, but the total pie isn't growing. And I just thought like, this feels like energy, but it's new. And I really liked the VC fund. And they had a concept because they had worked with really putting, operator with celebrity before to build. And, um, ended up meeting Tom Holland and heard his story. And we hit it off like very naturally on that very first call. And I found myself a couple days later with my wife of 14 years and the woman I've been with for 21 years. And I woke up in the middle of the night. I was tossing and turning, and she actually, goes like, "Hey, what's up? Why can't you sleep?" 21 years together, you don't talk in the
Yeah.
middle of the night.
Yeah.
And I think we talked from 1 o'clock until about 7, and she's in market research. And she was grilling me throughout the night, like, what happens if it fails? Why do you think this? What would you do? How would you position this? And at the end of the night, she goes, and she's the pragmatic one of the two of us. And she goes, you got to do this. This is a once in a lifetime thing. So 11 months in and now 48 hours removed, we've launched Bureau Brewing, which we believe will be a very differentiated, premiumized, non-alcoholic beer brand that, much like I think Performance Energy was grown by the behemoths of today, it's Celsius and C4, where both grew without the crossover and cannibalization of each other's brand. They spoke to different consumers and they grew the total pie. Like that's how I think about this relationship here too. And I don't know if I've ever had as much fun as I have had the past year working with my team and building this.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big, I guess, fan. I'm bullish on long term, the celebrity packaged goods trend as a whole. Like they're like anything else, it's still, you have to win at the blocking and tackling of CPG. There's a lot of like, you got to make great product. You got to like, there's all that, just having talent, regardless of how big
It's
that
not
talent
enough.
is not enough. But I do like the aspect of it being able to like cut through a lot of the noise and give you at least some early exposure and awareness and things that like you need as a early startup, especially when all of those costs are much higher than they've ever been. And like you want to
Hmm.
try to have a little bit of a cheat code or something that like can help you out through that process. So I always love that. I know people will pick like these outliers like, oh, look, that's trash, like whatever. And then they just like throw the baby out with the bathwater. I just love that scenario. And I'm always like, guys, you don't understand. Like, it's all going to move even lower. Like, it's going to move towards nano influencers having their own stuff. I mean, arguably, there's already some of that stuff happening with like the TikTok shop or live commerce and all that
Absolutely.
kind of stuff. Like, people are becoming their own, salesmen of their lives, and they're becoming so whatever. So it's like, in my mind, I don't see it ever kind of stopping. So I love always if there is something that makes sense. And I, before we talked, one of the big things that I wanted to kind of get a sense of was the authenticity to the talent, because to me that's always the arguably the unlock a lot of it. So
Yeah.
like I'll be fully admitting this, like I didn't really know Tom Holland outside of like I knew it was Spider-Man. Outside of that, like I again, this is probably because I'm a 39-year-old and I focus on other things, but like I didn't know. But so then I had to look into like what's his story and what's he all about, and like I started to get in a little bit of a sense of like his background with alcohol and like trying to like get off of that and like wanting to move into non-alcoholic beers. And like this to me seemed very authentic, very much like I
Yeah.
have my own problem, I have my own thing that I'm dealing with, and I'd love to have a solution that I can full feel very confident in being able to create and bring out to the world over just I'm a face that's an endorsement and I could make a lot of money by doing that with any brand. I could sign with Anheuser-Busch Zero or Bud Zero or whatever, and like I don't need to do this, but I feel passionate about doing this, so I want to do it. And like
Yeah.
that, when I figured that out, I was like, oh, okay, this is probably pretty interesting. I like this.
I I think that was the biggest thing for me in the journey because, you know, there were many things that needed to be true before it was about Tom Holland for me in taking this opportunity. It was did I believe in the consumer trend in the category, because if it was a little in out fad, like that wasn't something I wanted to be part of. And I really do believe that this is part of a broader trend. And it's not about the demonization or elimination of alcohol. Like I enjoy wine, I enjoy whiskey. This is about fitting into people's lifestyles so that they can be higher performing. Then building a business in general and beverage specifically, it takes a lot of capital. And having a partner that saw eye to eye, as Imaginary Ventures did, I knew I had a partner in that long term. And I don't have experience being the startup CEO that's raising capital every 12 months, and I didn't really want that. I want to focus on building a brand, telling a consumer story, and doing that. Then it was operational capabilities. I knew we could build an amazing team, and we have. And then it was Tom. Tom was the authentic story. But on our first chat, I think we kind of spoke about two key things that will always stick with me. One is he told me about his journey, and I told him I'm not on the same journey, but I'm very much, as I'm aging, theme of this whole conversation is my age, unfortunately, it seems like. As I'm aging, I have a glass of wine and with dinner, or a bottle of wine with my wife, and then we sit down and watch whatever garbage TV we want to, and you want something else. Well, if I have another glass of wine or something else, I'm not going to be highly productive the next day. um, Non-alcoholic fit that part of my lifestyle in general, or in like the airport beer is wonderful, but like truth be told, like when you're traveling a lot because you're building something, like you can't have that level. So we shared how we were on different journeys, but we both felt like there was an applicable nature there. And like I think the broader opportunity that he's aligned with is, whether you're sober, cutting back, or just cutting back for a night, there's a room for this. And then the second piece was, I wanted to make sure it was a partner that was, going to be in the trenches with me, because to your point, like it is the top spin of the brand. I think over time we had to build a brand that I think could stand on its own. So fast forward in 5 years, it is still very much Bureau founded by Tom Holland. But it's much more about the brand having its own legs and standing on its own, much like Skims and Kim Kardashian, right? Like still the face of the brand, but the brand lives without her. But early on, I needed to know that, like, one, we could be very credible and authentic. Um, he's been involved in the tastings, the brand creation, the marketing, the packaging. We text and we talk daily, and like intimately involved. But then we need to make sure that the brand as a whole had something that could live when he wasn't in the room or in the picture too. And I think we've created that. And right now, a couple of days in, what I'm most enthused about is just customer response to, yes, they love Tom. But then on top of that, they see the vision of what the brand can be, and that's been super motivating and very fulfilling to hear.
Yeah, and I love that you're talking about this in kind of longer arcs, because I think when we talk about celebrity packaged goods in that kind of general phase, is like at the beginning you want to pull as hard as you can on that lever because it's really important. But then as that time goes on, you want that to fade off to the background, and you want the brand and the product to be able to stand on its own. And a lot of times I think that's where the struggle, at least in the phase where we are in this kind of trend, is that people keep pulling on that lever because it's maybe, a dopamine, like it's you
That's
get a
right.
response from that, you get, obviously a revenue hit, you get these things that like people just can't give up on, and they don't realize the ultimate transition on a lot of these things. When you talk about the ones that have maybe exited in liquor or spirits and things like that, is like they've been able to transition away from, this is a spirit owned by this person, to this is just a great spirit that has sold a bunch of
Right.
stuff, and like we appreciate that. And a lot of these other categories or a lot of these other brands have always stayed so close to the celebrity founder, the talent, that they haven't been able to like get away from that. And as a large strategic or anybody like that, the risk, the key man risk, is that that person, as much as they love it and as much as they maybe poured their blood, sweat, and tears over it, they probably don't want to be the figurehead for the next 30 years. And when you buy a brand and you want to have a return on investment, and you have to buy the talent then. And if that talent doesn't want to stick around, there's that struggle if you don't do the transition phase. But I think that like there's obviously a ton of like energy and just things that you guys have done on the brand as a whole. Like I think when I looked at the can, what I really appreciated about the can, or just like the general packaging design, was that it looked very like traditional legacy. We started the conversation about where I grew up in very close to Pittsburgh. And so, like a lot of them drink the Miller High Lifes, and they drink the
Yeah.
Bud Lights. Like, and there's certain colors, certain looks, certain things of those cans. And I think that for whatever reason, the typical non-alcoholic beverage beer, these stuff, they have went in a more, I would say, like colorful craft beer kind of like looked and feel to them, which is great because maybe you can see it. And maybe as somebody that wants to signal that you're a wellness focused person, maybe you like that. You like to have that can in your hand. It says something about you. But I would argue that like, as we start to mature that category out, people aren't going to want to be as loud about what they're drinking. And this, to me, seems more of the traditional legacy kind of beer, where like, if you had that in your hand, are you drinking a Miller High Life? Are you drinking a Vero? Are you drinking, like, you're not making a statement. You're just, this
Right.
is just a part of what you're doing. This is just a part of who you are. And that moves into, I think, what you're mentioning about your story is different than Tom's. And like, as moves away from, the sober curious movement, and there's the dry Januaries and all these things that like started it and picked up the momentum, eventually you get into this idea that it's just a choice, mindful drinking. Like, is it one day you're making that? Is it one choice within the night? Is it something that you just are like me? I don't drink all that often, but yet I will pick it up and I'll do these
Yep.
different things from the non, like, there's a lot of, I think, then consumer flexibility, which these more, I guess, modern brands that are coming out now in the second wave, they have to think about that. It's kind of, we were mentioning, going back to the energy drinks, is like the beginning was very, you had to be loud, you had to be these things, you had to be wherever. Or now I think if a brand was to launch today in energy, like they have a much different landscape to approach, and they have a different use occasions, they have a different consumer segments, they have all these different things similar to non-alcoholic beer. Like, it's not the late 2010s, like there's only one type of buyer that's only focused on wellness and these types of things. There's people that are picking these up for so many different reasons. And
Yeah.
I think that gives the opportunity for brands to carve out different spaces. Like you said, it doesn't necessarily have to be that you're competing. There's just different brands for different
And
people, like in any category.
and within that too, I think you made so many great points, but you think about day parts, and like you think of, you mentioned, if you create a brand solely around that celebrity, then how is that of strategic value to that person? I think similarly, like, how do you make sure that you're, you know, going after a meaningful addressable market? And it can't be so niche and so limited. And so, like, when we launched, taking a step back to the C4 NutriBullet days, we had a C4 pre-workout powder, had about 45% market share in the globe. And it was very much, you took a scoop of this powder to go work out in the gym. All of a sudden, we launched an energy drink, and all of a sudden, C4 was part of your morning commute. It was on the construction site. It was, at gaming. The day parts expanded tremendously. Well, I think one, from a consumer standpoint, if you're only targeting sober, like that is a portion and a, great portion of the population, but a portion. But if you can target more broadly, like the beer drinker, and then all of a sudden you're now non-alcoholic. So when you're having that lunch meeting at work and you just want to enjoy an IPA, there are options for you. Like that potential creates one, not just a great narrative, but like a truthful, addressable TAM and usage occasion story that doesn't exist today. And I think all of that's like super fascinating and like part of how we're building this. And um, when we set out, it wasn't about creating a great non-alcoholic beer. We wanted to create a great beer. And you mentioned feeling legacy. Um, that was one of the bigger compliments that we had. We had our first like account meeting, and they made a comment like, wow, this doesn't feel like a brand new beer. Like I feel like it's always been in existence. And we wanted that. Like that bright color craft beer in 2024, they're great. I'm not taking away from it, but that will feel very much of the time where if we can feel more of the legacy of beer, because beer is thousands of years in existence, there's a history there. You don't have to rewrite what the story of beer is. You just have to modernize it for today's community and consumer. And that was really a lot of the motivation of what we were hoping to do. And, I think that was another thing on that first call Tom and I had call, like had together. It was very much an aligned vision on what that opportunity was. And I think it's been fun to try to execute against that.
And I don't know if you guys were intentional about the launch timing. I think when I look at it, I'm like, this is a great time to launch because there's a seasonality aspect to this category still. I don't know if people pay attention to that, but very much because of, I just talked shit about dry January, but like that is such
It's
a
an
moment for
important
people.
time. Yeah.
Like even when we're talking, go back to like the supplements, like we talk
New
trash
year, new
about like
you.
the new year. Yeah, it's like the same thing. And people are making changes, and if it's short term or not, that's the time when they have the most like interest in discovering new things and trying new products and wherever that is. And then you kind of rolling into that middle of Q4 into Q1 of like, hey, yeah, we're not going to probably be on all the shelves and we're not going to be everything, but we are going to have this brand to at least be out there and it's going to be available for people and they're going to be able to try this thing. And it's a good timing to kind of start because you're already like right in line with where, if it's some of the holiday stuff, but then, when you hit January, that's where the time frame where people are trying out new things. And a lot of times they're trying out non-alcoholic or adult non-alcoholic drinks. And they're going to try to figure out, is this something that they could stick with? Because a lot of them probably have never tasted a beer that is very thoughtful in the sense of how it's approached. It just doesn't have alcohol in it. Like a lot of it, I think you think back to your parents' age or when the drinks were kind of thought of as, an alcoholic that was struggling that needed to drink these because that was the only thing available and it would tasted like garbage. And
I saw a post on one of our posts that we did. Someone commented, "O'Doul's walked so Biro could fly." But like, I think it's just it was completely different. But the technology was different too, right? It was, you know, you can brew non-alcoholic beer is beer, like you brew it. It's four simple ingredients. But back then it was you brewed full strength beer and you watered it down. So like, yeah, of course it's not gonna be great. Now you play with different strands of yeast and you do different types of fermentation and like it was able to make a more true to beer experience. That is very different from our grandfathers, I think, non-alc options that they had.
yeah. And I always go back to this pretty shocking. I don't want to say it's shocking because I think it's actually pretty forward looking, especially for who put out this quote. But I think it was, I can't remember who at Anheuser-Busch or AB InBev kind of put this out, but they were saying, the next couple of years, I think it was 3 years, what they believe the share of non-alcoholic beer would be, I think it's 20%, which
Yeah.
like such a stark difference to where it was today. And then also how disruptive that is, even though, yes, they have their own versions, and I'm sure they're going to go through a bunch of M&A and make sure they get their slice, because that's the great thing about those businesses that have been around forever. But like at the end of the day is like to actually even take yourself out of the ego situation and go like, yeah, our core business is going to be hurt by this. And regardless, we still have conviction in that. We believe that this is something that's going to be a big thing, and consumers are going to change. If it's today, like we're mentioning around mindful drinking, of like, I think that's the opportunity today, because there's a lot of that
Yeah.
incremental shifting from this to this to generational shift of like, they just are not going to think alcohol's cool. And again, off camera, we were talking about, a little bit of my experience of like when I was, even before I was allowed to drink legally, like everything was binge drinking. And like, I can't imagine even going out or going to a house party or friends or this, that, where people weren't also doing that. That was just what you did. And like, if you
Yeah.
didn't, people looked at you like, what are you doing here? Like, get out, like you're a loser or something, which then now the kids, I think it's probably the opposite. They probably look at the kid that's getting like hammered and like, what are you doing? Like, so
Yeah.
then it's such a flip. And then that then creates such a longer opportunity of like, again, maybe it's not full on, sober, it's sober cure, some integration of like, what does that
Yeah.
look like to be that? But I do think like just I guess the foresight of like, these big brewers are saying like, regardless of what we think, and we know that our product is still going to have some value here, we know that it's going to look different in the future.
Without a doubt. And uh, another Tom quote that goes off of what you were saying. Culture has evolved from being, man, you were so fucked up last night, as being a positive, to like, man, you were so fucked up last night. Like that is a bad thing. And like, I think, it is about that mindfulness and like, God, like I didn't grow up and have everything recorded of every stupid thing I
Yeah.
did when I was, and now like those things are all influencing how people are behaving. But the constant theme is like, you still want to go out, you want to be with your friends, you want to laugh, you want to have a good time. And I think it is interesting though, like the brands that in history that have acknowledged that like I can be disrupted or disrupt myself are the ones that are legacy brands that will live on forever. And if the ones that just sit back and say, I'm not changing, like, no no company is too big not exist. And I think Heineken has done a phenomenal job of saying what they want non-alc to represent in the future and how they're investing to that. And you see the money that they're putting behind, investments in F1 and how they're building globally. It's phenomenal. And those dollars are going to help these other entrants, much like ourselves, kind of, ride the wave of consumer interest and intrigue. And I think all of those waves are just, rather than swimming against the stream, it really helps with the current to push you kind of in the same way. If you have great liquid, a great brand, differentiated. It's still not easy, but it's easier, I think.
I was going to keep going, and I'm like, that was such a fire quote at the end there that I didn't want to like throw off the rest. Like, watch, you want to end on a good one, like anything else, like, you know what I mean? Like, you take that last shot, you got to make the shot. You don't want to like end on a miss, because then it's going to like reverberate in the rest of your day. So, John, I honestly love this conversation. Every time we talk, I always love our conversation. So I'm glad we
It's great,
actually
Josh.
finally got to like record one, and then people will get to see that, maybe we're interesting a little bit, and together we maybe have a little bit more interestingness to us. I don't know. Maybe, that's the hope, I guess.
I enjoyed my conversation. If you enjoyed your conversation, hopefully some other people will too. But I enjoyed the past hour.
Hey, that's all that matters. I tell people, like, why do you make content? Well, for myself, and like, that's
That's
it. As
right.
long as
That's
I
right.
was happy with it, that's all that matters. So if we had fun, then it was a win. Who cares what if the people,
Success.
when I hit upload, if people don't like it, then at least we had fun.
Absolutely. Well, I really, sincerely, Josh, this was fun, and thanks, man. I appreciate you recounting the past 20 years of my life.
But I hope you enjoyed the first principles thinking that went into my latest YouTube video. If you did, can you do me a favor by hitting that like button? That quick and free action helps YouTube know my content is worth spreading to more people. Also, we're getting really close to reaching my next subscriber goal, and it would be great if you join me on this journey. But to do that, we need to fix the fact that slightly more than 3/4 of you that are watching this video right now are not subscribed to my YouTube channel, and that hurts my feelings. Regardless, I want to thank you for giving me some of your attention and time, and I'll see you on the next one.